In 1923, a Jewish grandmother on Orchard Street could stretch a single chicken into 7 meals. Her granddaughter today orders rotisserie from Whole Foods. Number 17 on this list was so common that pushcart vendors sold it on every corner of the Lower East Side, but try finding it today and even the oldest delis will stare at you blankly. These 25 dishes fed millions of immigrants who built this city with their bare hands. They survived pogroms, famines, and ocean crossings, but they could not survive the suburban supermarket. The recipes your great-grandmother carried in her head, the ones she never wrote down because everyone just knew them, those recipes died when she did. Before we start, hit that subscribe button. Let's count down the 25 immigrant recipes that vanished from New York kitchens. Hungarian immigrants crowded into tenements on the Upper East Side, and when money ran thin, mothers reached for cornmeal. Poliska was peasant food, a thick cornmeal mush cooked until it pulled away from the pot, then sliced and fried in bacon drippings until the edges crisped golden. In 1921, a 5-pound bag of cornmeal cost 12 cents, enough to feed a family of 6 for nearly a week. The dish arrived at the table steaming, topped with sour cream or crumbled sheep's cheese that Hungarian grocers sold from wooden barrels on First Avenue. Children drizzled it with honey when fathers were not looking. Oral histories from the Yorkville neighborhood recall mothers shaping leftover Poliska into cakes for the next morning's breakfast, fried crisp and eaten with black coffee before the factory whistle called. When Hungarian immigration slowed after the Quota Acts of 1924, the dish began its quiet retreat. Today, polenta sits on restaurant menus at $18 a plate, but Poliska, the version that sustained a generation, exists only in handwritten recipe cards yellowing in forgotten drawers. Number 24. Schmaltz and Gribenes, Lower East staples. Every Jewish kitchen on the Lower East Side kept a jar of rendered chicken fat near the stove, golden and fragrant, the foundation of a cuisine born from necessity. Housewives saved chicken skin and fat, rendering it slowly until the liquid fat separated and the skin crisped into dry beans, crackling bits of pure flavor that children begged to eat straight from the pot. By 1925, kosher butchers on Hester Street sold raw chicken fat by the pound for just pennies. Schmaltz went into everything: chopped liver, mashed potatoes, spread on rye bread with coarse salt. Health campaigns of the 1960s condemned chicken fat as poison, and within a generation the jars vanished. Crisco and margarine took their place. But old-timers will tell you that nothing makes chopped liver like Schmaltz. The jars are mostly gone now, and with them the taste of 1,000 Friday night dinners. Number 23. Svikova. Czech families settling in Astoria brought a dish that required patience, something New York rarely offered. Beef sirloin was marinated for days in root vegetables, vinegar, and spices, then braised until fork tender and served with a creamy sauce thickened with sour cream and cranberries. The preparation began on Wednesday for a Sunday meal. In 1922, Czech social halls along Steinway Street served svikova at community dinners, with tables packed with factory workers and their families. The dish required time that American life increasingly refused to give. By the 1970s, the Czech halls had closed, and svikova survived only in the memories of grandchildren who could describe the taste but not recreate it. Number 22. Kapusniak. Polish immigrants packed into Greenpoint tenements, and when winter pressed against thin windows, mothers made kapusniak. Sauerkraut soup, soured and smoky, was built on ham bones saved from better days. In 1920, sauerkraut sold for 3 cents a pound, making kapusniak the cheapest hot meal a family could produce. The soup stretched across days, improving with each reheating. Church cookbooks from Polish parishes recorded dozens of variations. Yet, as Greenpoint gentrified and Polish delis closed, kapusniak retreated from everyday tables. A soup that sustained generations through impossible winters now exists mostly in memory. Number 21st, supply al telefono. Italian immigrants from Rome brought a snack that delighted children and puzzled everyone else. Day-old risotto was mixed with egg and mozzarella cubes shaped into balls, breaded and fried until the cheese inside stretched into long strings like telephone wires. On Mulberry Street in 1924, vendors sold supply for 2 cents apiece. The dish required leftover risotto, which meant making risotto in the first place, a task that faded as Italian-American kitchens modernized. Today, arancini appear on upscale menus, but they are not the same. Supply were simpler, made from whatever risotto remained from Sunday dinner. Number 20, Kartoffelklöße. German families carried with them the tradition of the potato dumpling. Raw potatoes were grated, squeezed dry, mixed with mashed potato, and shaped into balls with a fried bread crouton hidden inside. By 1923, German butchers sold the dumplings ready-made, but traditionalists insisted only homemade would do. The preparation demanded technique that could not be written down. When German-American communities dispersed after World War II, carrying the shame the war had attached to their heritage, the dumplings gradually disappeared. Number 19, Zeppole di San Giuseppe, Bronx, St. Joseph's tradition. Every March 19th, Italian bakeries transformed into temples of fried dough. Zeppole were cream puffs, fried golden and filled with custard, topped with a brandied cherry. In 1926, Bronx bakeries sold Zeppole by the dozen for the Feast of St. Joseph. As Italian families moved to the suburbs, the neighborhood bakeries closed one by one. Today, a few old bakeries will still produce them each March, but the lines that once stretched around the block have dwindled. Number 18, borscht with ushka. Ukrainian immigrants made a Christmas Eve borscht with ushka, tiny ear-shaped dumplings filled with mushrooms, folded with precision that took years to master. In 1922, Ukrainian women gathered in church basements to fold ushka by the hundreds, their hands moving automatically while conversation flowed. By the 1970s, the church basements had emptied, and the youngest generation could no longer fold the ears properly. The army of grandmothers who once folded them by starlight has dwindled to a few. The knish that New Yorkers know today bears no resemblance to what Yonah Schimmel sold from his pushcart in 1910. Those original knishes were the size of a fist, their dough hand-stretched, thin as paper over floured cloth, until you could read a newspaper through it. By 1925, pushcart vendors sold knishes for 3 cents apiece. When production moved to factories in the 1950s, the hand-stretched dough became impossible to replicate. The taste of a real pushcart knish has been lost to efficiency. Number 16, caponata siciliana. Sicilian immigrants made a summer dish of fried eggplant mixed with tomatoes, celery, capers, and olives in a sweet and sour sauce. In 1924, Sicilian grocers on Union Street sold the components separately, each family's recipe a jealously guarded secret. But caponata required ingredients that American supermarkets did not stock. As the immigrant generation passed and rooftop gardens were paved over, the jarred versions that line grocery shelves became translations of translations. Number 15, vassilopita. Greek families baked a special bread only once a year, at midnight on New Year's Eve, with a coin hidden inside. The first slice went to Christ, the second to the house, then to each family member in order of age. In 1926, Greek bakeries on Dietmar's Boulevard sold hundreds in the days before the new year. As Greek families dispersed and church attendance declined, the midnight ritual faded. Bakeries still sell vassilopita, but fewer families know the proper way to cut it. On the hottest days of Lower East Side summers, Jewish housewives served a cold soup made from sorrel leaves, chilled, and served with sour cream and half a hard-boiled egg. In 1923, sorrel appeared in Jewish markets each spring. The soup was aggressively sour, a shock to the uninitiated. When the immigrant generation passed, knowledge of where to find sorrel passed with them. A soup that once cooled thousands of tenement kitchens now exists mainly in the memories of those who remember their grandmothers ladling it on sweltering August afternoons. Number 13. Irish soda farls. The Irish who settled in Hell's Kitchen brought a bread that required no yeast. Soda farls were made from flour, buttermilk, and baking soda, and they were cooked on a dry griddle until spotted brown. By 1921, Irish women baked farls fresh each morning, the bread still warm when children grabbed pieces on their way to school. As Irish Americans prospered and moved to the suburbs, store-bought bread replaced the morning ritual. The griddles were packed away. Number 12. Char Siew Bao from Mott Street. Chinatown bakeries in the 1920s produced steamed buns filled with roast pork that bore no resemblance to today's versions. The pork was roasted over wood until the edges blackened, then chopped and mixed with a sauce that varied from shop to shop. In 1925, bakeries sold buns for 5 cents to laborers who worked 18-hour days. The recipe required clay ovens that most bakeries no longer possess. When Chinatown modernized in the 1960s, the wood-fired ovens were replaced with gas, and something essential was lost. Kifli. Hungarian and Austrian Jewish bakers created crescent-shaped pastries made from dough rich with butter, rolled thin, and spread with walnut or poppy seed filling. In 1922, Hungarian bakeries sold kifli by the dozen for celebrations. The filling was ground by hand, the sugar measured by feel. When the bakeries closed and their bakers passed on, the recipes went with them. Roman Jews and Italian Catholics found common ground in tripe, simmered for hours in tomato sauce with mint and pecorino cheese. In 1926, trattorias served trippa on Saturdays when the dish had simmered since Thursday. The dish required tripe properly cleaned by butchers who knew what they were doing, a skill that faded as supermarkets replaced neighborhood meat markets. Number 9. Grießknödelsuppe, Viennese semolina dumpling soup. Austrian immigrants brought a dumpling soup so delicate it could cure any ailment. Grießknödel were semolina dumplings, light as clouds, that floated in clear beef broth. In 1923, Viennese coffee houses served the soup as a first course. Sick children were fed Grießknödelsuppe until their fevers broke. When the Austrian coffee houses closed in the 1950s, the soup retreated to home kitchens and then faded further. Number 8. Sensi. During Carnevale, Italian bakeries produced fried ribbons of dough so thin they shattered at a touch, dusted with powdered sugar. Sensi were made only in the weeks before Lent. In 1924, bakeries sold them by the bagful. The tradition required a community that observed Lent strictly enough to make the pre-Lenten indulgence meaningful. As observance faded, so did the urgency to eat sensi while you still could. Number 7. Kugel from the brick oven. Before electric ovens, Jewish housewives brought their Sabbath kugel to neighborhood bakeries to cook in the residual heat of brick ovens. The kugel would be slid in Friday afternoon and left overnight, emerging Saturday morning transformed by hours of slow cooking. In 1921, bakeries accepted kugels by the dozen. When brick ovens gave way to gas and electric, the overnight kugel became impossible. Number 6. Cotticino with lentils. Italian families from Emilia-Romagna brought a New Year's tradition of pork sausage served with lentils, whose coin-like shape promised prosperity. On December 31, 1925, Italian butchers sold cotticino by the hundreds. The sausage required a butcher who knew how to make it, and as Italian butchers retired without successors, cotticino became harder to find. Number 5. Mandelbrot. Jewish bakeries produced twice-baked cookies made with oil instead of butter, flavored with almonds and vanilla. In 1922, every Jewish bakery displayed trays in the window, and the cookies were sold by weight. Grandmothers kept Mandelbrot in tins, always ready for visitors. When commercial bakeries discovered biscotti in the 1990s, Mandelbrot retreated, perceived as old-fashioned. Number 4. Ellis Island beef stew. When immigrants arrived at Ellis Island, they were fed a meal designed to introduce them to their new country. Chunks of American beef floated in flour-thickened gravy with potatoes, carrots, and onions. Between 1900 and 1924, millions ate this stew as their first American meal. The recipe contained no garlic, no paprika, nothing that might taste like the countries left behind. It was a message. By 1924, the dining hall had closed, and the recipe existed only in government archives. Number 3. Sfincione Palermitano. Sicilian immigrants brought a thick, spongy pizza topped with tomatoes, onions, anchovies, and breadcrumbs. In 1926, Sicilian bakeries in Bensonhurst sold sfincione by the slice. When Neapolitan pizza became the American standard in the 1950s, sfincione retreated. A pizza that predates what Americans think of as pizza may soon vanish entirely. Number 2. P.T. Cece. The dish that separated true Lower East Siders from everyone else was pizza, jellied calves' feet mixed with garlic, hard-boiled eggs, and black pepper. In 1923, Jewish delicatessens sold pizza by the slice. Men swore by it as a hangover cure. The dish required calves' feet, and it required butchers who knew how to prepare them. When that community dispersed, pizza went with it. Number 1. Sunday gravy. The red sauce that simmered all day Sunday in Italian-American kitchens was not a recipe, but a ritual. It began Saturday night with browning meat. Sunday morning, the tomatoes went in. For 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours, the sauce simmered while the family went to Mass. In 1924, the smell drifted through every Italian neighborhood in New York. The gravy required time that modern life refuses to give. A home where someone was present all day. A family who would gather at the same table every week. When women entered the workforce and families scattered, Sunday gravy became a memory. The jarred sauces cannot replicate 3 generations arguing about whether the sauce needed more basil. Talk to the oldest person in your family this week. Ask them what their grandmother cooked. Write it down. These recipes aren't just food, they're proof that your family survived something. Don't let the supermarket be the end of that story. We're counting down 30 strange poor man lunches from the Great Depression that America completely forgot. These are the midday meals that kept families alive when banks collapsed, bread lines stretched for blocks, and a single nickel had to feed 4 mouths. From sandwiches built on nothing but condiments to pies made without a single apple, each entry tells the story of American grit, creativity, and the quiet desperation that turned empty cupboards into dinner tables. Expect ingredients your grandchildren would not recognize as food, flavors born from pure survival, and tricks that fed a nation when the nation had almost nothing left. Which forgotten lunch tops our list? Let's begin our countdown with number 30. Number 30. The ketchup sandwich anchored the lunchboxes of families who had run out of almost everything else. 2 slices of white bread, a thick smear of Heinz ketchup straight from the bottle, and nothing in between. By 1933, when unemployment hit 25%, a 14-ounce bottle of ketchup cost around 15 cents and could stretch across 2 dozen sandwiches. Children carried them to school wrapped in wax paper, the red sauce soaking into the bread by noon, turning the middle pink and soggy. Oral histories from Oklahoma and the Dust Bowl recall mothers apologizing quietly as they handed them over, promising something better tomorrow. Nobody complained. The sandwich silenced hunger, and that was the only measure that mattered. Number 29. The mustard sandwich was the ketchup sandwich's sharper cousin, favored in households where French's yellow mustard outlasted every other condiment in the icebox. A jar cost about a dime, and that single jar could anchor a week of lunches. Mothers spread it edge to edge on day-old bread, sometimes pressing the slices together so tightly the mustard bled through the crust. The flavor was loud, vinegary, and unforgiving, but it masked the staleness of bread that had sat too long on the counter. Children in Pittsburgh and Detroit remembered the sting on their tongues, the way it woke them up in the middle of a gray afternoon. It was not a meal, it was a decision to keep going. Number 28. The mayonnaise sandwich was the soft, gentler option for children who could not face another round of mustard or ketchup. Housewives whipped up homemade mayo from a single egg, a cup of oil, and a splash of vinegar, stretching it across a dozen lunches. Some families splurged on a jar of Hellmann's, which had spread from New York delis to national shelves by the late 20s. The bread turned slick and pale, the mayo soaking in until the slices fused into something almost custardy. In the South, they called it a white sandwich, and in oral histories from Alabama, grown men still remember the quiet shame of opening a lunch pail to find nothing but that pale, slippery square. Yet they ate every bite. Number 27. The sugar sandwich was the rare lunch that passed for a treat, though the ingredients told a harder story. White bread, a thin layer of butter if any could be spared, and a heavy dusting of granulated sugar pressed into the surface until it clung. A 5-pound bag of sugar cost around 25 cents in 1932, and a single bag could sweeten lunches for a month. Children carried them to schoolhouses across the Midwest, trading them for apples when the deal was good. The sugar would crunch between the teeth, the bread soft and yielding beneath, and for a few minutes it felt like dessert instead of desperation. Mothers watched them eat with complicated expressions, grateful the children still saw sweetness in something so thin. Number 26. Butter and sugar sandwiches elevated the plain sugar sandwich into near celebration territory, reserved for birthdays or Sundays when spirits needed lifting. Housewives whipped softened butter with brown sugar until the mixture turned into a coarse, sandy paste. They spread it thick across bread that had been lightly toasted to hold the weight. The butter melted slightly from the toast's warmth, and the brown sugar dissolved into caramel pockets that children hunted for with their tongues. Oral histories from rural Kentucky recall fathers slipping these into lunch pails on payday, a small bribe against the long walk to the mine. The sandwich cost pennies, but it carried the weight of a promise that things eventually would turn around. Number 25. The lard sandwich was the unvarnished truth of Depression hunger, a meal stripped of every ornament. Mothers spooned rendered pork fat onto bread, sometimes sprinkled salt across the top, and handed it over without apology. Lard was cheap, around 8 cents a pound in 1933, and every butcher's scrap eventually ended up in a tin on the stove, cooling into pale white grease. The fat carried calories that thin soup could not, and a working father needed those calories to last through a shift. Children in Appalachian coal towns learned to eat them slowly, letting the lard coat the roof of the mouth. It tasted of nothing much, just warmth and salt, and the quiet promise that supper might come. Number 24. Onion sandwiches ruled the lunch pails of men who worked outdoors and did not care who sat next to them afterward. A thick slice of raw, white onion, layered between bread with butter or lard, cost almost nothing. A single onion could make 4 or 5 sandwiches. A 3-pound sack sold for about 10 cents at the grocer. The bite was fierce enough to water the eyes, but the sweetness emerged after the first few chews, and the smell lingered on the breath long past sundown. Oral histories from Chicago stockyard workers recall the onion sandwich as a badge of labor. You smelled a man's lunch before you saw him, and nobody flinched. It was food for people who had nothing left to prove. Number 23. The peanut butter and onion sandwich sounds like a dare, but it was a genuine Depression staple, especially in farming communities across Iowa and Nebraska. Peanut butter was cheap and full of protein, about 23 cents a pound for the store-brand jars, and raw onion added crunch and moisture that otherwise had to come from meat. The combination was sweet, sharp, and strangely satisfying, coating the mouth in a way no single ingredient could. Farm wives packed them for husbands, heading out to fields stripped bare by drought, and children in one-room schoolhouses swapped stories about who had the bravest lunch. Nobody called it strange back then. It was simply what peanut butter and onions could do together when there was nothing else on the shelf. Number 22. The fried bologna sandwich carried a whiff of working-class luxury, the kind of meal a family celebrated when the paycheck actually came through. A pound of bologna sold for around 20 cents in 1934, and a single pound could stretch into 8 or 9 sandwiches. Housewives sliced it thick, scored the edges so it would not curl, and fried it hot until the rim browned and crisped. Laid between bread with mustard or a smear of mayonnaise, the sandwich carried more flavor than its price tag suggested. Children raced home from school hoping to smell that unmistakable grease in the pan. Bologna was processed meat's quiet gift to hungry America, and for many, the fried slice was as close to steak as Tuesday ever got. Number 21. Milk toast was the meal given to the sick, the very young, and the elderly who could no longer chew hard bread. Mothers warmed a cup of milk on the stove, buttered a slice of toast, laid it in a shallow bowl, and poured the hot milk over the top until the bread turned soft and porous. A pinch of salt or a dusting of sugar finished it off. The entire meal cost less than 3 cents and could be made in under 5 minutes. Oral histories from the Dust Bowl recall milk toast as the food of recovery, the meal that followed fevers and long nights. It tasted of nothing much, but it was warm and gentle, and in 1934, warmth and gentleness were harder to find than meat. Number 20. Water pie emerged from a kitchen experiment so improbable it sounds apocryphal, yet recipe cards passed between neighbors across West Virginia and Tennessee confirm it was real. Housewives mixed a cup of water, flour, sugar, vanilla extract, and a handful of butter shavings, poured the thin slurry into an unbaked pie crust, and slid it into the oven. 40 minutes later, something genuinely transformed. The mixture set into a pale custard with a wobbly sweetness that tasted faintly of butterscotch. The entire pie cost around 6 cents to make, Children ate it in silence, unsure whether to call it dessert or a miracle. It was both. Water pie was the clearest proof that Depression mothers could summon something from nearly nothing. Number 19. Vinegar pie predated water pie by decades, but found its revival during the lean years when lemons cost too much and apples had already been canned away. Housewives whisked apple cider vinegar with sugar, flour, and a single egg, pouring the tart mixture into a crust and baking until the top turned golden and the center barely trembled. The flavor mimicked lemon meringue with surprising accuracy, sharp and sweet at once. A gallon of cider vinegar cost around 30 cents and produced 20 pies worth of filling. Oral histories from the Ozarks recall vinegar pie appearing at church potlucks where nobody asked questions about the absent fruit. The crust held it together, the sugar softened the bite, and the plate came home empty every time. Number 18. Mock apple pie was the most famous sleight of hand in Depression baking, a dessert that contained 0 apples but somehow fooled the tongue. The 1934 recipe printed on the back of the Ritz cracker box called for 20 crushed crackers, water, sugar, cream of tartar, and cinnamon. Housewives layered the mixture inside a pie crust, and the result emerged from the oven looking and tasting startlingly like apple pie. The crackers softened into a texture that mimicked stewed fruit, and the cinnamon carried the illusion the rest of the way. A box of Ritz cost about 19 cents and could fill 2 pies. Children who tasted it never realized the trick. Some families kept making mock apple pie long after the Depression ended, preferring the memory to the real thing. Number 17. Prune pudding earned its fame when First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt served it at White House luncheons in 1933, partly as a gesture of solidarity with struggling Americans, and partly because the White House budget had tightened like everyone else's. Housewives simmered dried prunes with sugar, cornstarch, and a splash of lemon until the mixture thickened into a dark, glossy sludge. A 1-pound bag of prunes cost around 10 cents and fed a family of 5. The pudding was cooled, spooned into bowls, and served with a thin stream of evaporated milk, if any could be spared. Newspapers mocked it mercilessly, calling the White House menu an insult to American taste. But in kitchens across the country, prune pudding fed children who had never seen a fresh fruit in their lives. Number 16. Wacky cake, sometimes called crazy cake or depression cake, solved the impossible math of baking without eggs, milk, or butter. Housewives mixed flour, sugar, cocoa, baking soda, salt, vegetable oil, vinegar, and water directly in the baking pan, stirring with a fork until the batter came together. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to lift the cake into a tender crumb, and the cocoa masked any strange aftertaste. A single cake cost about 12 cents to make in 1935, a fraction of the price of any traditional recipe. Children in Oregon and Missouri remember the ritual of stirring the batter in the pan itself, a small act of kitchen magic that delivered real cake on a Sunday. Wacky cake still survives in family recipe boxes, though most bakers have no idea why it exists. Real quick, if you want the full collection, I put together a cookbook with 100 simple meals just like these. The link is right below in the description. Now, back to the countdown. Number 15. Cracker soup was the lunch of absolute last resort, the meal that appeared when even the pantry's dry goods had dwindled to crumbs. Housewives crushed saltine crackers into a bowl, poured boiling water over them, added a pat of butter if any remained, and stirred until the crackers swelled into a thick, salty mush. The entire meal cost under 4 cents per serving. Oral histories from West Virginia coal towns recall children eating it by the spoonful, blowing on each bite because the water was still scalding. It tasted mostly of salt and hot starch, But it was filling, and it was warm, and for a family watching the last of the flour disappear, cracker soup was the bridge to whatever came next. Number 14. Dandelion salad turned the front yard into a grocery store when the icebox ran empty. Housewives sent children out with bowls to pick the youngest, tenderest dandelion greens before they turned bitter, usually in early spring. The leaves were washed, tossed with bacon grease, a splash of vinegar, and a sprinkle of sugar, then served warm over whatever bread was on hand. A bowl cost absolutely nothing. Oral histories from Polish and Italian immigrant families across Pennsylvania recall dandelion salad as the first real food of spring, the meal that marked winter's end. The greens were slightly bitter, bright with vinegar, and unexpectedly satisfying. The yard had become a pantry, and the pantry had become survival. Number 13. Cornmeal mush anchored breakfast and lunch across the rural South for the entire Depression. Housewives boiled a pot of water, stirred in yellow cornmeal until the mixture thickened into porridge, and served it plain with a pat of butter or a drizzle of molasses. A 5-pound bag of cornmeal cost about 12 cents and could feed a family for a week. The leftovers were poured into a loaf pan, chilled overnight, then sliced and fried in lard the next day, producing a second meal from the same batch. Children ate mush standing up, sitting down, and sometimes walking out the door. It was bland, filling, and reliable, the rhythm section of Depression cooking, always present, rarely celebrated. Number 12. Hot water. Cornbread skipped the eggs, milk, and leavening that modern cornbread requires, producing a dense, chewy cake made from just cornmeal, salt, and boiling water. Housewives shaped the hot dough into patties with wet hands, then fried them in a skillet slicked with bacon grease until the outsides crisped, golden. A single pound of cornmeal produced enough patties for a family of 6. The flavor was earthy and unadorned, the texture somewhere between a biscuit and a pancake. Oral histories from Mississippi and Arkansas recall hot water cornbread as the bread of tenant farmers, the lunch eaten in fields still damp with morning dew. It cost pennies to make and carried the weight of an entire workday on its shoulders. Hoey cakes predated the Depression by a century, but they returned to American tables with a vengeance during the 1930s. The simplest version called for cornmeal, water, and salt, fried in a hot skillet until the edges browned and the middle firmed up. The name came from the legend that field workers once cooked them on the blade of a hoe held over an open fire. A skillet of hoe cakes cost less than 5 cents and fed 4 people. Children carried leftover hoe cakes wrapped in cloth to schoolhouses, where they softened them with a splash of milk or a smear of lard at lunch. The taste was plain and toasty, a reminder that American cooking had always been able to stretch corn into something almost resembling a meal. Number 10. Corn mush and molasses were the sweet version of the same workhorse meal, upgraded with a drizzle of blackstrap molasses when molasses could be afforded. A quart jar of molasses sold for about 15 cents and lasted a family several weeks. Housewives ladled hot cornmeal mush into bowls, poured the thick dark syrup across the top, and watched it sink slowly into the grain. The flavor was deep, earthy, and almost smoky, the closest thing to dessert many children ever tasted at lunch. Oral histories from Georgia and the Carolinas recall mothers rationing molasses drop by drop, making sure every bowl got a fair share. It was the kind of small generosity that defined Depression kitchens, where abundance was impossible, but fairness was sacred. Number 9. Tomato gravy on biscuits turned a can of tomatoes into a full meal with almost no effort. Housewives heated bacon grease in a skillet, stirred in a spoonful of flour to make a roux, then poured in decanned tomatoes and milk until the mixture thickened into a pink, savory gravy. Ladled over hot biscuits split in half, it became lunch, breakfast, or dinner, depending on what else the day offered. A can of tomatoes cost around 8 cents, and a batch of biscuits maybe 6 cents more. Oral histories from Tennessee recall tomato gravy as the last resort, the trick that turned empty shelves into something edible. The flavor was tangy, creamy, and unexpectedly rich, proof that a single can could carry an entire meal. Number 8. Creamed peas on toast was the gentle, pale lunch served in homes where a single can of peas had to become a full meal. Housewives drained the peas, made a white sauce from flour, butter, and milk, folded the peas into the sauce, and spooned the mixture over toasted bread. A can of peas cost around 9 cents, and the whole lunch came in under 15 cents for a family of 4. The flavor was soft, buttery, and faintly sweet, the toast crunching pleasantly beneath the creamy top. Oral histories from New England recall creamed peas as the food of widows and elderly neighbors, the meal served when a family needed something warm and easy. It was stretching, and it was quiet cooking for quiet times. Number 7. Potato peel pancakes were the Depression's sharpest lesson in waste, a recipe that took what most kitchens threw away and turned it into lunch. Housewives saved peels from breakfast potatoes, chopped them fine, mixed them with a little flour, an egg if available, salt and pepper, then fried the mixture into small, crispy cakes. A pound of potatoes cost around 3 cents, and the peels that would have gone into the compost bucket became a second meal. Oral histories from immigrant neighborhoods in Cleveland and Milwaukee recall the pancakes sizzling in lard, crackling golden at the edges. The flavor was earthy and surprisingly rich, and the act of making them felt almost like revenge against hunger itself. Nothing was wasted, not even the skin. Number 6. Navy bean soup was the quiet workhorse of Depression lunches, simmering on the back of the stove from morning until supper time. Housewives soaked dried beans overnight, then cooked them with a ham hock, onion, and whatever celery or carrot had survived the week. A pound of dried beans cost 7 cents and fed a family for 2 days. The broth turned thick and smoky, the beans softening until they broke open on the spoon. Children ate it with hunks of cornbread torn straight from the pan, dunking each piece until it turned brown and heavy. Oral histories from every corner of the country mention bean soup. It was the common language of Depression kitchens, the meal everyone made and nobody forgot. Number 5. Creamed chipped beef on toast, later nicknamed SOS by soldiers who encountered it in Army mess halls, was the poor family's answer to a hot lunch. Housewives bought dried chipped beef in small glass jars for about 15 cents, tore the thin, salty slices into pieces, and folded them into a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Spooned over toast, the dish looked almost elegant, the pale cream dotted with dark ribbons of meat. The salt carried the flavor, and the sauce stretched a single jar across multiple meals. Oral histories from Pennsylvania and Ohio recall creamed chipped beef as the lunch served when company dropped by unannounced, a way to present dignity on a budget. It tasted richer than it had any right to. Number 4. City chicken was the strangest bait and switch in Depression cooking, a dish that contained no chicken at all. Butchers sold cheap cuts of pork and veal threaded onto wooden skewers, breaded in cracker crumbs, and fried until golden. The skewers mimicked drumsticks so convincingly that families who could not afford real chicken served city chicken at Sunday lunch without embarrassment. A pound of pork scraps cost about 12 cents, far less than a whole bird. Oral histories from Pittsburgh and Cleveland recall mothers arranging the skewers on platters with mashed potatoes and gravy, creating the illusion of a proper Sunday meal. Children believe the story. Some grew up and only learned the truth years later, stunned that the chicken of their childhood had never been chicken at all. Number 3. The poor man's meal was the exact recipe that kept untold millions of American families alive through the worst years of the Depression. Housewives diced potatoes and onions, fried them in a skillet with a little lard, then added sliced hot dogs near the end to brown with everything else. A pound of potatoes cost 3 cents, a pound of hot dogs was about 10 cents, and the whole meal fed 4 for under 20 cents. The smell of frying onions and hot dogs drifted through tenement hallways every night, a signal that lunch or dinner was nearly ready. Oral histories from New York, Chicago, and Detroit all returned to this single dish. It was the meal of last resort and the meal of ordinary weeknights, the cheap salvation that asked almost nothing and gave just enough. Number 2. Spam sandwiches arrived near the end of the Depression, when Hormel introduced the canned meat in 1937 for around 25 cents a tin. The timing was perfect. Housewives sliced the pink loaf thick, fried it until the edges crisped and caramelized, then layered it between bread with mustard or a smear of mayonnaise. A single can produced 6 generous sandwiches. Children carried them to school in lunch pails, the smell of fried Spam filling the classroom by noon. The flavor was salty, smoky, and deeply satisfying in a way that leaner meats could not match. Oral histories from across the country remember Spam as the meat that finally tasted like meat, the canned miracle that bridged the gap between Depression scarcity and the wartime kitchens that would follow. And finally, in first place, Hoover stew crowned the Depression lunch table as the ultimate survival meal, named with bitter irony after the president blamed for the crisis itself. Housewives simmered a pot of macaroni, canned tomatoes, sliced hot dogs, and whatever canned vegetables they could afford, usually corn or peas, until the mixture thickened into a rough, chunky stew. A full pot cost under 25 cents and could feed a family of 6. The meal appeared in soup kitchens, Hooverville camps, and home kitchens alike, the shared language of hunger that crossed every state line. Oral histories from coast to coast mention Hoover stew by name, often spoken with a half smile, the kind of expression reserved for hardships endured and survived. Children ate it without complaint. Fathers returned home to bowls of it after fruitless job searches, and mothers ladled it out while promising tomorrow would be different. The flavor was tomato bright and slightly salty, the kind of meal that filled the stomach and lingered in the memory long after the Depression ended. For millions of Americans, Hoover stew was not just lunch. It was proof that a single pot would carry an entire family through the worst years the country had ever seen. And one last time, if you want the full collection, I made a cookbook with 100 simple meals like these. The link is in the description below. These 30 forgotten lunches tell the story of a generation that refused to go hungry quietly. From ketchup sandwiches to Hoover stew, every recipe was an act of stubborn love, a mother's promise that the next meal would come. Which one would you actually try? Tell me in the comments. Your grandmother knew, and now you do too.